Hello and welcome to another episode of Off the Beaten Tracks, and I've got some albums for you, so let's get started. Let's begin with Jeffrey Komaner, self-titled album from 1974. I went into the store and I saw this in the dollar bins, and it looked interesting. It's promo, and didn't know much about Jeffrey, but opened it up. The vinyl looked good, except it had a factory defect. There was a bump of vinyl on one of the sides, so I put it back sensibly. Went back the next week, it was still there. Opened it up, looked, the bump was still there, and because I'm a weak individual, I did pick this up. Glad I did. This is a really good album. Little folk, little pop, little rock. It starts off with a song called Swamp Stomper, which is really a good song. I think it's got Charlie McCoy on this, playing harmonica. Good album. And turns out that Jeffrey is also a bit of an actor. He was in Phantom of the Paradise. I don't know how many of you remember that movie, but I saw it a couple of weeks ago after decades, and it wasn't nearly as bad as I thought it was. He also wrote some of the songs for Midnight Cowboy, so an impressive find. Number two, this is Kerner, Ray and Glover. This is part of the early electro folk movement. Now, I'm not a hard-bitten folkie, so it takes more than the downtrodden worker to get me interested in an album. Not that this doesn't have songs about downtrodden workers, it does. But it's got a good sound, got some good tunes on it. Just a really appealing album. So you've got borderline folkies like me. This is certainly an album to consider. Now, another folk album. This is Tom Brosseau. I picked this up in Sacramento. This is North Dakota Impressions. Like this, totally different sound from the early folk of Kerner, Ray, and Glover. This is a little poppier, has a couple of instrumentals. Like this album quite a bit. Tom has a high, reedy voice. The songs are nicely tuned. And it's a bit melancholy, as you'd expect anything about your impressions of North Dakota to be. But, well, worth picking up if you see it. Jimmy Powell started his career in the early 1960s, British, in a band called Jimmy Powell and the Five Dimensions. Not the Fifth Dimension. Could have made some money there, but no. Five Dimensions. This is a solo album from 1970. And it describes him here, if you're interested in what you to expect, a voice that takes the paint off your walls. And yes, after listening to this, there are certain songs on this where his screaming could remove your latex. But there are songs where he lays back a little on the, doesn't push it quite as much vocally, and those to me are the more appealing songs, mostly covers. Back in the USSR, Sugar Man by Bobby Darin. He does Out of Time by Jagger Richards. I like this album. You don't need to scream quite as much, Jimmy. This is an odd duck and an expensive duck to boot. This is Arthur Lee Harper. Love is the Revolution. It from 1969 cost me a packet of money. I don't know if this is a British, you know how the British cardboard is very flimsy? This is very flimsy. I might explain the price. It's kind of soft, folk psych. He was a discovery of Lee Hazelwood, who guided both albums that Arthur Lee Harper did. They did not sell, so he got all depressed and went back to Florida and became a rocket engineer. So the music's lost, his space is gained, but an album I would recommend. Now, this one I didn't know what to expect. This is a terrible cover. This is a terrible album title, I Want to Be President by Joe Sciarrino. Bought it, it's an EP, didn't cost me a lot of money, so I thought I'd take a flyer on it. Glad I did. There's a couple of songs on this, I think Any Don't Do It and possibly She's a Fighter, that remind me of Marshall Crenshaw. This is from 1984. This guy is still around apparently plays a lot in the San Diego area. If you can get this for $1, it cost me $3, but mine was sealed. I would recommend it just for those 2 songs because they were good. Now this cost me more than a couple of bucks. Arrows. These are a British band. I didn't know what to expect. If you look at the cover, they kind of remind you of the Shoes or possibly early Raspberries, but their sound is more like Hamilton, Joe, Frank, and Reynolds, or later Dennison. Mostly kind of middle of the roads, that 70s pop sound that, Don't Pull Your Love Out on Me, Baby, kind of exemplifies. That's really what this album is. They did have a few hits in England on previous albums. Luckily me, I got the one without any hits. They did go on, like Kenny Rogers and the First Edition, Paul Revere and the Raiders, and the Hudson Brothers, to do a television show in England. They did 2 seasons. This, I don't know whether I'd recommend it for the kind of money that I paid for this, but if you like that kind of 70s pop sound and are looking for songs you haven't heard before that could have been hits but weren't, this is your album. Now, my cover of the week, this. Couldn't resist this, and it's just as good on the back. I don't know much about this. I haven't listened to this album yet, but really I could just bathe my ears, bathe my eyes in this picture. I could look at it all day. This is just the kind of thing I'm totally weak for. This, I think, cost me a couple of bucks, but gorgeous, gorgeous cover. Next, we're going with McGuffey Lane. Now, these guys are from Ohio, actually named after a street in Ohio. They toured with the Charlie Daniels Band, the Allman Brothers, Marshall Tucker. Kind of gives you an idea who these guys are, even though they're from Ohio. It's kind of Southern rock. Not a bad album. They don't really have those standout songs like the Allman Brothers, Charlie Daniels, and Marshall Tucker had, and that's probably why they were kind of a mid-range band. They put out a number of albums. In fact, they put out their 11th album in 2017. This is from 1981, and I think this is their second album. I paid too much for it, but if you pick it up in a buck bin, probably, and you like Southern rock, perhaps that would be something you might go for. This, another album cover I couldn't resist. Now, this is kind of an exercise in expectations. Didn't cost a lot of money. I do like things to be in good shape, and generally because it's, I don't know whether you can see that, but they're right there. It's split up the top. It's the kind of album that you'd expect going through the bins is going to be trashed. And it wasn't. When I opened it up, the album inside, I played it. I've listened to this album. It's quite clean inside. And was surprised. I mean, you take a look at him, you'd have thought he was a belter like, a folk belter like Valentine Pringle or somebody like that. But he actually reminds me, his voice is a little thinner, a little higher pitched, kind of Don McLean territory in spots. And he's got an interesting history. I think he's out of San Francisco. Was the first entertainer to play the legendary Hungry Eye. Right off. He's got some good stuff there. I think he sold a couple of songs to the Kingston Trio. I don't know how many of these songs he writes. It's an interesting bunch of songs. He has it goes from a song about his wife cavorting with sailors in town while he's taking care of the 8 kids and singing them lullabies, to songs about the Virgin Mary being hungry for cherries. It's also got a Hawaiian song, I think a couple of Hawaiian sounding songs, and a cheery song about the Titanic going down. Can't always judge a book by its cover or an album. I'm glad I didn't in this case. This is an interesting album, and it is not what you'd expect. This is actually a picture of Mr. Stan Wilson. But yes, he does not sound like, I'm trying to think of other people besides Mr. Pringle, but it's well worth $3. It's probably worth $5, especially if it's not all ripped on the top. Well, that's my last album. Thank you for hearing me ramble. I will see you next time.